My name is Paige Sterling. I'm 28 years old, and 15 years ago, my own parents threw me out of the house when I was just a 13-year-old child. Last week, they showed up at the will reading of my Uncle Alistair, the man who actually raised me for the past 15 years. They walked in with smug, confident smiles and a high-priced private attorney, absolutely certain they were about to walk out with millions. But when attorney Victoria Sharp opened that sealed manila envelope and began to read, those smiles vanished. By the time she reached Clause 7, my mother, the woman who had once coldly declared I was no longer her daughter, shot to her feet. Her face was chalk white, her mouth hung open in absolute disbelief. Before I tell you what happened next, if you enjoy stories about justice, resilience, and family boundaries, please take a second to like and subscribe to Their Secret Stories, but only if you genuinely connect with this journey. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Drop a comment and let me know. To understand why my mother reacted that way, I need to take you back to the summer of 2011, when I was a 13-year-old girl who believed she was the root cause of every single problem in her family. Growing up in a cramped, drafty house in Quincy, Massachusetts, I learned early on that love in our household was never distributed equally. My father, Gideon Sterling, ran a struggling local locksmith shop downtown. He was a man of very few words, and most of those words were just quiet agreements with whatever my mother decided. My mother, Eleanor, worked the front counter at a local dry cleaner and ran our household with the cold precision of someone who always knew exactly who deserved what. My sister, Sienna, was 2 years older than me. She had Mom's golden blonde hair, Mom's bright blue eyes, and Mom's easy, charming laugh. Everyone in Quincy said so. Sienna looks just like you did at her age, Eleanor, they would say, and my mother would absolutely beam. I, on the other hand, looked like our late grandmother, my father's mother. I had dark brown hair, quiet brown eyes, and a highly introspective disposition. My mother never explicitly said it was a bad thing. She just never said much about me at all. The differences showed up in every corner of our lives. For Sienna's 15th birthday, my mother threw a massive party with 15 guests, a 3-tier custom cake from a boutique bakery in Boston, and a professional karaoke machine rental. For my 13th birthday, just 3 months later, it was simply the 4 of us sitting around the kitchen table. We shared a marked-down, day-old cake from the supermarket near the dry cleaners. The smudged blue frosting simply read "Happy Birthday" with no name attached, a generic leftover order that someone else had canceled. I didn't fully realize what was happening until I turned 12. That was the year I discovered Sienna had a college savings account that had been quietly opened when she was just 5 years old. It held 8 years of consistent deposits, thousands of dollars. When I asked my mother why I didn't have one, she looked at me as if the very question was an insult. "Sienna needs a proper fund for college," she said flatly. "You'll figure something out. You've always been good at adapting." That was the first time I truly understood my place in that house. I was the spare child, kept around but never truly wanted. The summer of 2011 changed everything. In April of that year, I secretly applied for the New England Robotics Institute at MIT. It was a prestigious 6-week residential program for young students who showed exceptional promise in engineering and mathematics. The scholarship covered every single expense: tuition, room and board, lab materials. The total value was $4,500. I didn't tell a soul in my house that I had applied. I had learned early on not to build up my hopes out loud. On May 15th, the acceptance letter arrived. Out of over 2,000 applicants across New England, only 50 students had been selected. I was one of them. For exactly one afternoon, I felt like I actually mattered. But that evening, Sienna found out about an elite design intensive in New York City that her art teacher had mentioned. It was a 3-week program with no scholarship options. The price tag was a steep $1,100. At dinner that night, my mother announced the solution she'd already worked out in her head. "Paige, you'll need to decline that robotics thing," she said, serving the potatoes. "We can't afford to have both of you doing summer programs, and Sienna's design camp will look much better on her university applications." She said it so casually, as if she were discussing meal planning, not completely crushing my dreams. I stared down at my plate. The words slipped out of my mouth before I could stop it. "No." The entire table went dead silent. Even the old refrigerator in the corner seemed to stop humming. Excuse me, my mother's voice dropped to that dangerous, quiet register she used on customers who tried to bring in stained clothes past the return policy. This scholarship isn't your money to redirect, I said, my voice shaking but entirely clear. I earned this, it's mine. My mother looked at me as if I had transformed into a complete stranger right before her eyes. If you can't make sacrifices for this family, she said slowly, then you are not a part of this family. At 13, I thought she was just incredibly angry. I didn't realize she meant those words literally. 3 days after that dinner, I walked home from the public library to find my life's belongings packed into 2 black contractor garbage bags sitting on the front porch. My mother stood right in the doorway, her arms tightly crossed. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked completely resolved, like someone who had just finished a necessary but tedious chore. I called Alistair, she said coldly. He'll be here to pick you up. From now on, you're his problem. I stood frozen on that porch, trying to process what was happening. Behind my mother, I could see my father standing in the dim light of the hallway. He didn't look at me. He didn't say a single word. I looked up at the second-floor window. Sienna was watching from behind the lace curtain. When our eyes met, she stepped back into the shadows of her bedroom. She didn't come downstairs. I waited on that porch from 6 in the evening until 10 at night, 4 agonizing hours. My mother went back inside after the first 5 minutes. The porch light was never turned on. Uncle Alistair lived in Charlestown, about 45 minutes away, but he had been out of state on business. He drove straight through the night the moment he got the message. When his navy blue Volvo finally pulled into the driveway, I was still sitting on those garbage bags, my knees pulled tightly to my chest. He got out of the car without saying anything at first. He just walked up, looked at me, and wrapped me in a hug so tight I could barely breathe. From now on, he whispered quietly, you have a home. That night, as we drove north through the darkness toward Charlestown, I didn't know that my mother had signed a formal document before Uncle Alistair left the house. I didn't know what it meant. I was just a terrified kid staring out the passenger window, wondering what I had done to be thrown away. It would take 15 years for that document to resurface, and when it did, it would change absolutely everything. Uncle Alistair's house in Boston's historic Charlestown neighborhood wasn't massive, but it felt grand compared to the cramped corner I had occupied in my parents' house. For the first time in my life, I had a room that was entirely mine. More importantly, I had someone who genuinely believed in me. Uncle Alistair had built Sterling Crest Holdings from the ground up, a commercial real estate firm he had started with a single small warehouse he purchased after working double shifts for 6 years. By 2011, he owned several prime properties across the Boston metro area. He had never married, and he had no children of his own. When I arrived on his doorstep with nothing but 2 plastic garbage bags, he didn't just take me in. He invested his entire heart in me. Over the next 4 years, I poured every ounce of my energy into my education. I graduated from Charlestown High in 2014 as the class valedictorian and president of the math club, carrying a 4 unweighted GPA. Boston University offered me admission with a partial academic scholarship to their Questrom School of Business. By 2018, I had earned my bachelor's degree in finance, graduating summa cum laude with a 3.94 GPA. Uncle Alistair had given me internship opportunities at Sterling Crest Holdings starting in my sophomore year. I learned the business from the very bottom: data entry, lease analysis, tenant negotiations, and property assessments. In 2019, after working 18 months at a prominent accounting firm called Caldwell & Stone, I earned my CPA certification. 1 year later, Uncle Alistair offered me a position as the company controller. By 2021, I was named Chief Financial Officer. On my 26th birthday, I was actively managing a portfolio of 12 commercial properties with a combined value of $23.7 million. Uncle Alistair sent me an email that morning. I still have it saved in a special folder. The subject line read, "To my daughter." The message was brief. You don't need to prove anything to the people who abandoned you, Paige, but you do need to prove to yourself that you are worthy of the space you occupy. You have already done that. Happy birthday, Paige. In 15 years, my biological family reached out to me exactly 3 times. The first was in 2012. My mother called Uncle Alistair's personal phone, not mine, to ask for $6,000. My father had lost his main contract at the locksmith shop and times were tight. Surely Alistair could help his own brother. Uncle Alistair firmly declined. He told me about the call afterward, his jaw set tight. "They didn't ask about you once, Paige," he said softly. "Not how you're doing in school, not if you're healthy, they just wanted a payout." The second contact came in 2016. Sienna mailed me a formal wedding invitation too. There was no personal note, no "I hope you're doing well," just the printed card sent to Uncle Alistair's Charlestown address. I didn't attend, I didn't send a gift, and I didn't respond too. The third was in 2020. My mother sent me a direct email, the very first personal contact she had initiated since throwing me out. The subject line was simply, "checking in." The message mentioned that she had seen an article in the Boston Business Journal about Sterling Crest Holdings expanding its portfolio into the Seaport District. She wrote that she hoped I was doing well and suggested we should catch up sometime over coffee. I deleted the email without responding. I wasn't holding a bitter grudge. I had simply built a full, rich life that did not include them, and I saw absolutely no reason to change that. In the autumn of 2024, Uncle Alistair received a medical diagnosis that shattered our world: advanced congestive heart failure. The doctors gave him 12 to 18 months. He lasted 8. During those final months, Uncle Alistair met with his estate attorney multiple times. He quietly updated his will in June of 2024, 6 months before he passed. When I asked him about the updates, he simply smiled and patted my hand. "Everything is taken care of, Paige," he told me. "You just focus on keeping the business running. I've handled the rest." I didn't know what he had written. I didn't know about the specific clauses. I trusted him completely, but I had absolutely no idea what was coming. Uncle Alistair passed away on February 15, 2025. He went peacefully in his sleep at Massachusetts General Hospital, with me holding his hand. 1 week later, on February 22nd, I was sitting in my office at Sterling Crest Holdings when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar Quincy area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Paige." The voice was immediately recognizable. 15 years hadn't changed my mother's particular way of pronouncing my name, as if she were tasting something bitter she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to swallow. "Eleanor," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. Not Mom, just her name. There was a brief pause on the line. I could almost hear her mental gears grinding as she recalibrated. "I heard about Alistair," she said, trying to sound warm. "I'm so incredibly sorry for your loss. I was thinking I should come up to Boston for the memorial service, to pay my respects." "The memorial was 3 days ago," I said. Another long pause. "Oh, well, I also heard there's an official will reading coming up. Family has a legal right to attend these things, you know, especially when it involves a brother's estate." There it was, the real reason for the call. "How did you even find out about the will reading?" I asked. "I have retained an attorney, Quentin Blackstone," she said, a note of sharp confidence returning to her voice. "He made some inquiries." The name Blackstone sparked a faint memory. Uncle Alistair had mentioned a Quentin Blackstone once, an attorney he had briefly consulted years ago and decided never to work with again. I spoke to Victoria Sharp, Uncle Alistair's estate attorney, the very next morning. She confirmed my worst suspicions. Eleanor had hired Quentin Blackstone to file a formal claim challenging the will. Their grounds: undue influence. They were alleging that I had manipulated a dying man in his final months of cognitive decline. They were also demanding to attend the formal will reading as immediate family members of the deceased. I stared at the framed photo of Uncle Alistair sitting on my desk. In the picture, he was smiling, almost as if he had anticipated this exact scenario, almost as if he had planned for it. Victoria Sharp's office occupied the 39th floor of One International Place, a towering skyscraper overlooking Boston Harbor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, you could usually see the entire waterfront, but today rain streaked the glass, matching the somber mood in the room. Quentin Blackstone filed a formal challenge to the estate on behalf of Gideon and Eleanor Sterling, Victoria said, sliding a thick manila folder across her mahogany desk. "The claim alleges undue influence. They are arguing that you isolated Alistair from his biological family during his terminal illness and pressured him to alter his estate plans." I scanned the legal filing, my stomach tightening with every paragraph. "They are demanding 50% of the total estate," Victoria continued. "Their legal theory is that as Alistair's only surviving sibling, Gideon should be entitled to inherit under state intestacy laws, or at the very least receive a significant share that reflects the natural bonds of brotherhood." Natural bonds, I repeated incredulously. Gideon and Alistair hadn't spoken in 8 years before I even came to live with him. Did you know that? Victoria nodded calmly. I am well aware. Alistair shared the entire family history with me, but that isn't what concerns me about this filing. She pulled another document from her folder. They don't actually need to win this case, Paige. If this goes to formal litigation, the entire estate could be frozen for 12 to 18 months during discovery and trial. Meanwhile, the properties still need active management, tenants need attention, and bills must be paid. A protracted court battle could cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees and potentially devalue the entire portfolio. So they're betting I'll offer a quiet payout just to make them go away, I said. That is exactly their strategy, Victoria agreed. It is highly common in high-value estate disputes. I looked down at the challenge filing. In the section detailing our family history, Eleanor had written that I had abandoned my parents and exploited Alistair's loneliness. The very woman who had thrown me out on a dark porch was now claiming I had abandoned her. Do you have any formal documentation about your living circumstances back in 2011? Victoria asked. Anything that legally establishes what actually occurred when you went to live with Alistair? I thought back to that night, the black garbage bags, the 4-hour wait in the dark, Alistair arriving in his Volvo. I was 13, I said quietly. I didn't exactly keep legal records. Alistair did, Victoria said. She reached for her office phone and asked her assistant to retrieve a specific file from the archives. 20 minutes later, a yellowed folder was placed on the desk. Victoria opened it carefully, scanning the contents before looking up at me with an unreadable expression. Paige, did you know about this? She slid a document across the desk. The bold header read, Voluntary Relinquishment of Parental Rights and Transfer of Guardianship, dated July 15, 2011. The document explicitly stated that Gideon James Sterling and Eleanor Sterling, being of sound mind, voluntarily and permanently relinquished all parental rights and responsibilities for their minor daughter, Paige Sterling, and transferred full legal guardianship to Alistair Sterling. At the bottom of the page were 4 clear signatures, my mother's, my father's, Uncle Alistair's, and a notary public from Plymouth County. File number 2011 GH 5847. They didn't just kick you out, Paige, Victoria said softly. They legally gave you up. They signed away their parental rights entirely. As far as the law is concerned, Eleanor and Gideon Sterling ceased to be your parents the moment they signed this paper. My hands began to tremble. I had been 13 years old, sitting on a cold porch in the dark, entirely unaware that my parents were inside signing legal papers to wash their hands of me. What does this mean for their claim? I whispered. Victoria's expression shifted to one of sharp resolve. It means Gideon has absolutely no legal standing to claim an inheritance through a familial relationship. Legally, he is not your father. He severed that connection himself in writing 15 years ago. Victoria offered me 2 paths forward. Option 1, we negotiate, she said. I reach out to Blackstone, explain that their legal position is fundamentally flawed, and offer a settlement, perhaps $500,000, in exchange for them withdrawing the challenge and signing a waiver of all future claims. It's faster, cleaner, and avoids a public spectacle. And option 2. We proceed with the will reading exactly as scheduled. They have demanded to attend as family members. We let them. Then we present the evidence, the guardianship transfer, the financial history, and everything Alistair wanted disclosed in the event of a challenge. She paused. Alistair anticipated this, Paige. He left very specific instructions on how to handle this exact scenario. He wanted the absolute truth on the record. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room of the house Alistair had left me, staring at the family photos on the mantel. There were pictures of me at every stage, my high school graduation, my college commencement, the day I passed my CPA exam, my first official day as CFO. In every single photo, Uncle Alistair was beaming proudly beside me. There were no photos of Gideon or Eleanor, not a single one. I thought about Alistair's email from years ago. You don't owe them anything, but you owe yourself the truth. At 7 the next morning, I called Victoria. I want the will reading to proceed, I said firmly. No settlement, no buyout. If they want to be present for this, let them. We are not hiding a single thing. Are you absolutely sure? Victoria asked. Once this becomes public, there is no going back. They chose to make this a legal battle when they filed their challenge, I replied. I'm just respecting their choice. The formal will reading was scheduled for Friday, March 14, 2025 at 2. 8:00 p.m. in the Sharp and Associates main conference room. The next few days were a blur of intense preparation. My best friend, Nadia Petrova, who had joined Sterling Crest Holdings as our HR director 3 years earlier, helped me organize the documentation. She was the only person besides Victoria who knew the full, unvarnished story of my childhood. 47 emails, Paige, Nadia said, looking up from her laptop in my office on Wednesday evening. 47 personal emails from Alistair to you over a decade, documenting his exact relationship with you and his specific reasons for estranging himself from Gideon. The emails painted a crystal-clear picture. In 2002, Gideon had borrowed $90,000 from Alistair with a signed, written promise to repay the loan within 5 years. 23 years had passed, and not a single dollar of that debt has ever been returned. That broken promise had fractured their relationship long before I arrived. My arrival in 2011 had absolutely nothing to do with their estrangement. It had already been festering for nearly a decade. Nadia also compiled the financial performance reports from my 3 years as CFO. Under my leadership, the Sterling Crest Holdings portfolio had grown from $17.7 million to $23.7 million, a 34% increase in total value. Occupancy rates averaged 96%, and tenant satisfaction scores were the highest in the company's history. On Thursday evening, I met with Dr. Camille Laurent, the therapist I had been seeing since my early 20s. "Remember why you're doing this, Paige," she said gently. "You're not seeking revenge. You are closing a painful chapter of your life. There is a profound difference." "What if I feel satisfaction when they realize they've lost?" I asked honestly. Dr. Lawrence smiled. "That's called justice, Paige. Feeling validated when the truth finally comes out isn't the same as cruelty. The real question is what you choose to do with your life afterward." I drove home that night through the rain-slicked streets of Boston, thinking deeply about her words. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror before bed. "They have no power over you anymore," I told my reflection. "Only you get to write your story now." Friday was coming, and I was entirely ready. Okay, let me pause here for a second. If you've made it this far and you're wondering how I handled what came next, drop a comment with your prediction. What do you think Eleanor did at the will reading? And if this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to set firm boundaries with toxic family, don't forget to subscribe to their secret stories. We're just getting to the part you've been waiting for. Now back to that Friday afternoon. The main conference room of Sharp and Associates occupied a corner of the 39th floor, with massive windows offering a gray, overcast view of Boston Harbor. On a clear day, it would have been breathtaking. On March 14, 2025, the sky was a heavy, steel gray that matched my mood perfectly. I arrived 15 minutes early, at 1:45 p.m. I wore a tailored navy blue suit, professional, understated, and sharp. My hair was pulled back in a neat, simple bun. I had learned from Uncle Alistair that the most powerful people in any room never need to announce their presence. The conference room could easily seat 20 people at the main mahogany table. When I entered, 14 people were already present. Victoria Sharp sat at the head of the table with 2 of her junior associates. Jasper Stone, the senior auditor from Caldwell & Stone, who had managed Alistair's accounts for over a decade, occupied a seat near the window. Representatives from 3 major charitable organizations filled several chairs along the side: the Boston Pediatric Trust, the Beacon Housing Initiative, and the New England Coastal Preservation Alliance. Uncle Alistair had been a major benefactor to all 3 for over 20 years. 5 senior staff members from Sterling Crest Holdings sat together near the door. They had worked alongside Alistair for years and had known me since my very first days as an intern. Victoria caught my eye and gestured toward a seat at the center of the table, directly across from where she would be reading the document. I took my place, carefully arranging the folder of documents Nadia had prepared in front of me. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I could see the elevator lobby. At exactly 2:03 p.m., the elevator doors slid open. My mother stepped out first. Even from a distance, it was clear she had dressed for a dramatic performance. She wore a sharp black dress, a formal pearl necklace, and full makeup. Behind her came my father, my sister, and a man in an expensive charcoal suit carrying a leather briefcase. The show was about to begin. Eleanor Sterling entered the room as if she owned the building. That was always her way, projecting a confidence she hadn't earned and claiming space she had never been given. She surveyed the room with a practiced expression of dignified grief. Behind her, my father, Gideon, shuffled in, wearing an old gray suit that didn't fit his frame anymore. His eyes found mine briefly, then immediately darted away. He had always been incredibly good at looking away when things got difficult. Sienna followed closely behind in a pastel pink dress, a bizarre choice for a will reading, as if she had gotten confused about what kind of event she was attending. At 30, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with her travel schedule. Their attorney, Quentin Blackstone, brought up the rear. He was a tall, silver-haired man with the kind of polished confidence that only comes from decades of high-stakes corporate litigation. His briefcase probably cost more than my first month's salary at the accounting firm. Eleanor's gaze swept the room until it landed directly on me. "Ah," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet room. "You're here already. I was hoping we could speak privately before this starts, Paige. Family matters should really be handled by family." I didn't stand up. "Eleanor," I said, using her name deliberately. The single word made her pause mid-stride. Something flickered in her eyes before she quickly recovered. "The proceedings begin in 2 minutes," I continued. "I'm sure whatever you have to say can wait." Victoria Sharp rose from her seat at the head of the table. "Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Sterling, Ms. Sterling, Mr. Blackstone. There are seats arranged for attending parties along the back wall. The main table is reserved strictly for designated beneficiaries and estate representatives." Eleanor's jaw tightened. She had clearly expected a seat at the center of the table. Instead, she was being relegated to the margins of the room. She wasn't even allowed at the main table. Eleanor didn't take her seat quietly. Instead, she detoured past the representative from the Boston Pediatric Trust, pausing to introduce herself with an expression of deep sorrow. "I'm Eleanor Sterling," she said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Alistair's sister-in-law. We were incredibly close for many years before this unfortunate estrangement." She glanced meaningfully in my direction. The pediatric representative, a woman in her 50s named Dr. Rosemary Mercer, nodded politely but said absolutely nothing. Eleanor continued, undeterred. "It is so tragic how certain people can come into a family and create such division. Alistair was such a generous, trusting man, perhaps far too trusting." I kept my eyes fixed on my folder. I didn't give her a reaction. I had learned long ago that Eleanor fed on attention and drama. Sienna, settling into a chair against the wall, added her own complaint. "Uncle Alistair used to visit us all the time when we were kids. I don't understand why Paige gets to sit up there and we're forced to sit back here." Quentin Blackstone was already writing furiously on his legal pad, documenting everything, trying to build a narrative of exclusion. I gave him absolutely nothing to work with. Eleanor took her seat, but she wasn't finished. As Victoria organized her papers, Eleanor's voice cut through the quiet room once more. "A child who has been rejected by her own parents usually has a very good reason for it. I just wish Alistair had seen through her the way we did. A mother always knows." The cruel words hung heavily in the air. Several people in the room shifted uncomfortably. Jasper Stone, the senior auditor, stared at Eleanor with open disbelief. I really looked at her for the first time in 15 years. She hadn't changed at all. The same desperate need to control the narrative, the same absolute conviction that she was the true victim. Victoria cleared her throat loudly. "It is 2:10 p.m. We will begin." Victoria Sharp broke the wax seal on a large envelope with the careful precision of a seasoned professional. "This is the last will and testament of Alistair Raymond Sterling," she began, her voice carrying the formal weight the moment demanded. "Born July 4th, 1953, deceased February 15th, 2025. This document was executed on June 18th, 2024, and represents the final expression of Mr. Sterling's wishes regarding his estate." Eleanor sat forward slightly, her pearls catching the overhead fluorescent lights. Victoria continued reading the preliminary sections. Article 1 confirmed Alistair's identity. Article 2 declared him to be of sound mind and memory. Victoria noted that a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation had been conducted by a licensed physician on June 10, 2024, 8 days before the will was signed. The evaluation confirmed that Mr. Sterling possessed full testamentary capacity and was under no undue influence at the time of execution. I caught Eleanor exchanging a frantic glance with Quentin Blackstone. They had been banking on challenging Alistair's mental competence. This preemptive medical documentation completely shattered that strategy. Victoria read on, revoking all prior wills. Then she turned to Article 4, the detailed inventory of assets. At the time of death, Mr. Sterling's estate included the following: 12 commercial properties located throughout Suffolk and Middlesex County, with a combined assessed value of $18.2 million. Investment accounts containing diversified equity holdings valued at approximately $4.1 million. Cash and liquid assets totaling $1.4 million. I heard Sienna whisper loudly to Eleanor, "That's almost $24 million. Eleanor nodded, her eyes narrowing with calculated greed. Victoria looked up briefly. The will contains 47 pages. I will now proceed to Article 5, which addresses specific bequests and exclusions. She turned the page, adjusting her reading glasses. Article 5, regarding Gideon James Sterling, brother of the deceased. Eleanor actually smiled. She wouldn't be smiling for long. Victoria's voice was steady and clear as she read the opening line of the section. I make no provision in this will for my brother, Gideon James Sterling, for the following reasons, which I explicitly wish to be read aloud and entered into the formal record. Eleanor's smile instantly flickered and died. Victoria continued reading Alistair's own words. First, in March of 2002, Gideon borrowed $90,000 from me with a signed, written promise to repay the full amount within 5 years. 23 years have passed, and not a single dollar of that debt has ever been returned. I have retained the original promissory note as legal documentation. Gideon's face drained of color. He clearly hadn't expected his decades-old financial betrayal to be aired in front of a room full of strangers. Second, Victoria read, on July 15, 2011, Gideon and his wife, Eleanor, voluntarily executed a legal document relinquishing all parental rights to their daughter, Paige Sterling, transferring full legal guardianship to me. This document was properly witnessed, notarized, and filed. Eleanor shot to her feet, her face contorted in anger. What does that have to do with anything? That's private family business. Victoria paused, looked at Eleanor over her reading glasses, and continued reading without acknowledging the outburst. The significance of this document is as follows. By legally terminating their parental relationship with Paige, Gideon and Eleanor severed any claim they might have had to inherit from my estate through her. Paige is my sole legal heir. Gideon is not her legal father. Therefore, Gideon has no familial relationship with my designated heir, and absolutely no standing to challenge this will on the grounds of family connection. Gideon stood up now as well, his voice shaking. This is ridiculous. I'm Alistair's brother, his blood brother. Quentin Blackstone grabbed Gideon's arm, pulling him back down into his seat, but even the attorney's face had gone a pale shade of gray. Victoria reached into her file and produced a document. For the record, the original voluntary relinquishment of parental rights is on file with the Plymouth County Family Court, file number 2011 GH 5847. I have a certified copy here, which any party may examine. She laid the document on the center of the table. Eleanor stared at it as if it were a live grenade. Eleanor didn't sit back down. Her carefully constructed mask of dignified grief was completely gone, replaced by sharp, desperate anger. This is insane, she yelled. That piece of paper doesn't mean anything. We are still her family. Victoria's voice remained cool and level. Mrs. Sterling, I must ask you to take your seat. Disrupting the formal reading of a will is a matter the court takes very seriously. Eleanor ignored her entirely, pointing a trembling finger directly at me. She did this. She manipulated Alistair against his own flesh and blood. She poisoned his mind against us for 15 years. The representatives from the charities looked incredibly uncomfortable. They hadn't signed up for a toxic family meltdown. Sienna tugged desperately at Eleanor's sleeve. Mom, sit down. Everyone is watching. I don't care who's watching, Eleanor's voice cracked. I want to know how this happened. Alistair loved Gideon. They were brothers. Finally, I spoke. My voice came out calm, steady, and quiet, the exact way Uncle Alistair had taught me to speak during difficult business negotiations. Never raise your voice, make them strain to hear you. Eleanor, you made a choice 15 years ago. You put my belongings in trash bags and left me on a dark porch in the cold. Then you went inside and signed a legal document giving me away. I was 13 years old. The entire room went completely silent. That was your decision, I continued, looking her dead in the eye. Not mine, not Uncle Alistair's, yours. Everything that is happening in this room today is simply the direct consequence of what you chose to do that night. Eleanor's mouth opened, but no words came out. I don't hate you, I said steadily, but I also don't owe you a single thing. You made sure of that when you signed that paper. Quentin Blackstone was writing furiously on his legal pad, though I couldn't imagine what legal strategy he thought he could salvage from this wreck. Victoria cleared her throat. If we may continue, I have not yet read Clause 7. Eleanor finally sank back into her chair, her breathing shallow, but Clause 7 was the one that would officially end all of their hopes. Victoria turned to page 12 of the document and paused. Then she read the words that changed my life forever. Article 7, Designation of Sole Beneficiary. The room collectively held its breaths. I hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including all real property, investment accounts, liquid assets, and personal effects, to my legally adopted daughter, Paige Sterling. Adopted? The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Eleanor's face went completely white, as if every drop of blood had been drained from her head. Adopted? Gideon's voice was hoarse and weak. Since when? Victoria answered with the same calm precision she had used from the beginning. Mr. Alistair Sterling formally and legally adopted Paige Sterling on September 12, 2012, when she was 15 years old. The adoption was finalized in Suffolk County Family Court, file number 2012 AD 3291. Since Mr. and Mrs. Gideon Sterling had already legally relinquished their parental rights in 2011, no parental consent was legally required. Sienna stared at me in shock. So, you're not even related to us anymore. I met her eyes, not legally, not since Mom and Dad signed me away. Victoria continued reading Alistair's words from the page. Paige is not merely a beneficiary of my estate. She's my daughter in every way that matters, legally, practically, and emotionally. She has worked diligently alongside me for years, proven her immense competence and integrity, and I trust her completely to continue the legacy I built. There is no one more deserving of this inheritance, and no one on this earth whom I love more. My vision blurred with tears. I blinked them back, deeply moved. Uncle Alistair had never told me about the specific language of this clause. He had kept it a secret, waiting for this exact moment, knowing this day might come. Eleanor was shaking her head slowly, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. This can't be legal, she whispered. Quentin, tell them this isn't legal. Quentin Blackstone didn't answer. He was staring down at his legal pad, his pen completely motionless. He knew, as any competent lawyer would, that the case was completely over. Victoria reached into her folder and withdrew a smaller, sealed envelope. There is one final item, she said. Mr. Sterling left a personal letter for Paige, with explicit instructions that I read a portion of it aloud during these proceedings if Paige consents. I nodded, not trusting my voice to speak. Victoria opened the envelope and unfolded a single handwritten page. Uncle Alistair's familiar, elegant script filled the paper, the same handwriting I had seen on birthday cards, sticky notes, and holiday cards for 15 years. Victoria began to read. Paige, if this letter is being read aloud, it means things occurred exactly as I expected. Your biological family showed up looking for money they never earned from a man they never cared about. I am incredibly sorry you have to go through this public spectacle, but I also know you are more than strong enough to handle it. A soft, choked sound escaped Eleanor's throat. You came to me as a wounded, terrified child, thrown away by the people who were supposed to protect you. But you did not let that define your life. You transformed your pain into determination, your loneliness into independence, and your rejection into pure resilience. I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life. Victoria's voice softened slightly as she read the final lines. I didn't save you, Paige, you saved yourself. I simply gave you a safe place to do it. Everything you have achieved, your education, your career, your beautiful character, you earned through your own hard work. I am leaving you my estate not because you need it, but because you deserve it, and because I know you will use it to help others the way I tried to help you. Do not let them make you feel guilty for surviving them. You owe them nothing. You owe yourself everything. I love you, Paige. Forever your father, Alistair. Tears were streaming down my face now, and I didn't bother to wipe them away. Eleanor made one last, desperate attempt. She stood up again, but this time her voice had completely shifted. The sharp anger was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading tone meant to sound like wounded motherhood. Paige, sweetheart, I know things were incredibly hard when you were young. I made mistakes. I admit that now, but we are still blood. We can work through this. Can't we at least talk about dividing the estate fairly? I wiped my eyes and looked directly at her. You gave up the right to call me sweetheart 15 years ago, Eleanor. I want to contest this will. Eleanor announced loudly to the room, turning to her lawyer. Quentin, tell them we have grounds, undue influence. Alistair was sick and she isolated him. Quentin Blackstone finally spoke, his voice stripped of all its earlier polish. He sounded like a man reading his own career obituary. Mrs. Sterling, perhaps we should discuss our options in private. No, tell them we're going to fight this in courts, Eleanor demanded. Victoria interrupted by turning her tablet around to face the room. On the screen was an email thread. Mr. Blackstone, perhaps you would care to explain this email to your clients. The room went dead silent. Victoria read the email aloud. This is an email dated March 3, 2022, from Alistair Sterling to Quentin Blackstone. The subject line is termination of services. In the email, Mr. Sterling writes, Quentin, I am ending our professional relationship. Your continued advice that I include Gideon in my estate plan despite his years of financial exploitation and his treatment of Paige is entirely unacceptable. I will be engaging new counsel. Victoria looked up, her gaze locking onto Blackstone. You previously represented the deceased, Mr. Blackstone. You were terminated because you actively advocated for Gideon's interests over Alistair's explicit wishes. And now, you have accepted a case against Alistair's estate without disclosing this massive conflict of interest to your current clients. Blackstone's face had gone the color of damp concrete. Eleanor turned to stare at him in shock. You told me we would win this, she whispered. He had no answer. Quentin Blackstone stood up abruptly, gathering his leather briefcase with trembling hands. I need to review these documents, he muttered, his polished composure completely shattered. We should discuss our options privately, Mrs. Sterling. Discuss what? Eleanor's voice rose. You're leaving, right now in the middle of this. Blackstone didn't answer. He was already moving toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room, walking with the stiff, rushed gait of a man who knew his career was actively imploding. Quentin, Eleanor called after him. Quentin. The conference room doors closed behind him with a soft, heavy click. Eleanor stood frozen, completely abandoned by her own attorney in front of everyone she had hoped to intimidate. Gideon hadn't said a single word in minutes. He sat slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the carpet. He had spent his entire life passively following Eleanor's lead, and now she had led them both off a cliff. Sienna was crying quietly into a tissue. I couldn't tell if she was upset about the lost millions or the sheer public humiliation of the moment. Eleanor turned back to look at me one last time. The confident mask was entirely gone. Underneath was only desperation, and beneath that, perhaps the very first stirrings of genuine regret. Paige, please, her voice broke. We can still. We're still a family, aren't we? Blood is blood, you could still. I stood up from the table. Eleanor, you stopped being my family on July 15, 2011. You signed the document yourself. I didn't make that choice. You did. I gathered my folder of documents and looked at her steadily. I don't hate you. I actually feel deeply sorry for you, but you have absolutely no claim on my life. Not legally, not emotionally, not in any way that matters. I turned to Victoria. Can we please continue with the remaining articles? Victoria nodded. Eleanor sat down heavily, her head in her hands. She did not speak again for the rest of the reading. Victoria turned the page with practiced calm. Article 9, Charitable Bequests. I direct that the following gifts be made from my estate, $500,000 to the Boston Pediatric Trust, to be used for the establishment of an academic scholarship fund for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. $300,000 to the Beacon Housing Initiative for the construction of affordable housing in the greater Boston area. $200,000 to the New England Coastal Preservation Alliance for environmental education programs. Dr. Rosemary Mercer from the Boston Pediatric Trust nodded solemnly. Alistair was one of our most consistent and dedicated donors for over 2 decades. This gift will change the lives of hundreds of families. The representative from the Beacon Housing Initiative added, we've built several homes with Alistair's past support. This will fund at least 4 more. Victoria continued reading. I also request that my daughter, Paige, continue the charitable giving programs I established during my lifetime at her sole discretion. I trust her judgment completely. I found my voice. I will honor everything Uncle Alistair built. A warm realization washed over me as I looked at the charity representatives sitting in the room. They weren't there because the law required it. They were there because Uncle Alistair had personally asked them to come. He had wanted objective witnesses who could testify to exactly what happened here today. If Eleanor and Gideon tried to pursue their frivolous lawsuit, Alistair had anticipated and blocked every single move. Dr. Mercer caught my eye and offered a kind smile. Alistair used to talk about you constantly, Paige. Every board meeting, every donor event. Paige achieved this, Paige managed that. He was so incredibly proud of you. I blinked back fresh tears. Even in death, Uncle Alistair had surrounded me with a community of people who truly believed in me. When Victoria finished reading the final articles of the will, she turned to me. Paige, as the sole beneficiary and executor of the estate, would you like to say a few words? I hadn't planned on speaking, but as I looked at the faces watching me, I realized there were things that needed to be said, not for Eleanor's benefit, but for my own closure. I stood up. Most of you knew Uncle Alistair far longer than I did. He took me in when I was 13 years old and had absolutely nothing. He gave me a home, a top-tier education, and most importantly, a family that actively chose to love me. I looked around the room at the Sterling Crest Holdings employees who had watched me grow from a quiet intern into the chief financial officer. With this inheritance, I fully intend to continue everything Alistair built. The properties will be managed with the exact same integrity he established. Our charitable commitments will be fully maintained, and I will be establishing a brand new scholarship fund, the Paige Sterling Robotics Scholarship, designed specifically for children from difficult family situations who just need someone to believe in them. My eyes found Eleanor, still sitting rigid and defeated in her chair. As for my biological relatives, I hold no bitter grudges. I made my peace with what happened a long time ago, but peace does not mean pretending the past didn't happen, and it certainly does not mean opening doors that I have worked incredibly hard to close. I took a deep breath. Alistair taught me that family is a choice. The people who actually show up for you when your world falls apart, those are your true family. By that definition, the people in this room who knew Alistair, worked with him, and respected him. You are far more my family than the people who happen to share my DNA. I sat back down. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Jasper Stone, the senior auditor, began to clap. The rest of the room quickly followed. Eleanor didn't move a muscle. Victoria formally concluded the reading. The will has been read in its entirety. All legal requirements have been fully satisfied. Ms. Sterling, you may contact our office next week to begin the formal transfer process. The estate should be fully settled within 14 business days. People began to rise, quiet conversations murmuring to life around the room. Eleanor stood up slowly, looking like a woman who had aged 10 years in the span of 2 hours. Gideon was already shuffling quickly toward the exit, refusing to look at anyone. Sienna gathered her purse and followed her father without saying a word. Eleanor lingered. She turned back to look at me one final time. Her makeup was slightly smeared. The confident, smug woman who had walked into the room expecting millions now looked incredibly small. She opened her mouth, and for a split second, I saw her lips form what might have been the start of "I'm sorry." But then she closed her mouth, turned away, and walked out of the room. I watched her go. This was the woman who had thrown me away like damaged goods, who had signed legal papers to make it permanent, and who had shown up 15 years later expecting to profit from her cruelty. I felt a quiet, complicated emptiness, the strange peace that comes when a long, painful chapter of your life is finally, truly closed. Dr. Mercer from the Boston Pediatric Trust approached me as the room cleared. Alistair talked about you every single time we met, she said, shaking my hand warmly. He told me once that taking you in was the best decision he ever made in his life. I can clearly see why. She pressed a business card into my hand. When you're ready to discuss the new scholarship fund, please call me directly. Nadia appeared at my side, squeezing my arm tightly. You did it, Paige, she said quietly. Alistair would be so incredibly proud of you. I looked at the framed photo of Uncle Alistair I had placed on the table. I hoped she was right. I need to take a quick breath here for a second. That was the exact moment I had been dreading and hoping for at the same time. If you've ever had to stand up to someone who deeply hurt you, someone who still believed they were the victim, you know how absolutely exhausting it can be. Have you ever been through something similar in your own life? Tell me about it in the comments below. And if you want to know what happened after that conference room emptied, stay with me. The story isn't over yet. 1 week after the will reading, Victoria Sharp filed a formal complaint with the Massachusetts Bar Association regarding Quentin Blackstone's severe ethical violations. I didn't ask her to do it. She did it because it was her professional obligation. When an attorney witnesses another lawyer violating the explicit rules of professional conduct, reporting is required. The complaint outlined 3 major violations: conflict of interest, failure to disclose his prior relationship with the deceased, and blatant misrepresentation of his client's legal standing. 2 months later, in late May of 2025, the Bar Association issued its formal ruling. Quentin Blackstone was suspended from practicing law for 6 months. He was also fined $15,000 and required to complete mandatory ethics retraining. Within weeks of his suspension, 3 of Blackstone's largest corporate clients quietly transferred their business to other firms. I heard through legal circles that his firm's annual revenue dropped by roughly $200,000 that year. Nadia asked me once if I felt satisfied by Blackstone's professional downfall. I didn't do anything to him, I told her honestly. He did this to himself. I just happened to be in the room when the consequences finally caught up with him. And that was the absolute truth. I hadn't sought revenge against Blackstone. I hadn't filed the complaint or lobbied for his suspension. He had made his own unethical choices, taking a case he knew was compromised, lying to clients who trusted him, and betting he could win through empty intimidation. Some people build their own prisons without any outside help. 3 weeks after the will reading, an email appeared in my inbox from an address I hadn't seen in years: eleanorsterling1969@gmail.com. The subject line read, "Please read this." The message was much longer than I expected. Eleanor had never been one for written communication. She always preferred phone calls where she could easily control the tone, interrupt, and redirect the conversation. "Paige, I know you probably won't read this, but I need to say some things. I've been thinking deeply about what happened at the will reading. I was incredibly angry and I said things I absolutely shouldn't have said, but I want you to know that I understand now that I made mistakes when you were young. I was completely overwhelmed. Your father and I were struggling terribly with finances and things just got away from us. I'm not asking you for money. I'm simply asking for a chance to make things right between us. We are still family, Paige. Blood doesn't just disappear because of legal papers. I am your mother. Nothing on earth can ever change that. Can we please talk? I think if we just sat down together, we could work through this. I love you. I always have. Mom." I read the email 3 times. Then I called Dr. Laurent, my therapist, and read it to her over the phone. "What do you notice about the language she uses, Paige?" Dr. Laurent asked. I thought about it for a moment. She vaguely acknowledges mistakes, but she doesn't actually name what they were. She immediately blames external circumstances, financial struggles, being overwhelmed. She says she isn't asking for money, but then immediately pivots to working through this so we can be a family again. And she still signs it Mom, even though she willingly signed away that right 15 years ago. "What do you want to do?" Dr. Laurent asked. I took 2 full days to compose my response. It was exactly 4 sentences long. "Eleanor, I have read your email. I forgave you a long time ago for my own peace of mind, not for yours, but I do not want a relationship with you. Please do not contact me again." She never replied. I felt absolutely no guilt, only a profound, beautiful clarity. 2 months after the will reading, a physical letter arrived at my home address in Boston. It wasn't an email. It was an actual handwritten letter on plain lined paper, postmarked from Quincy. The return address listed the name S. Miller. Sienna had taken her husband's last name when she married years ago. I opened it reluctantly, fully expecting more emotional manipulation, but what I found inside was entirely different. "Paige, I am not writing this to ask you for anything. I don't want money, and I don't expect your forgiveness. I just need to say something to you that I should have said 15 years ago. The night Mom and Dad kicked you out, I was watching the whole thing from my bedroom window. I saw you sitting on the porch with those black garbage bags. I watched you for 4 hours. I saw you sitting completely alone in the dark, waiting, and I never once came downstairs. I was 15 years old. I could have brought you a glass of water or sat on the porch with you, or at least told you how sorry I was. Instead, I just hid behind the curtain like a complete coward. That choice has haunted me ever since. Every single time Mom would talk about you, always blaming you, always painting herself as the victim, I would think about that bedroom window and about my own silence. I'm not asking you to forgive me, and I'm not asking for a relationship. I just wanted you to know that I know exactly what I did was wrong. I failed you when you needed a sister most. You deserved so much better from me. If you never want to hear from me again, I completely understand, but I couldn't let another year pass without telling you the absolute truth." I read Sienna's letter 4 times. It was the very first honest, accountable thing anyone in my biological family had ever said to me. I didn't write back immediately. I needed time to figure out what, if anything, I wanted to do with this unexpected opening. But for the first time in 15 years, I felt something other than cold distance when I thought about my sister. 4 months after the will reading, I finally wrote back to Sienna. Dr. Laurent had helped me think through what I genuinely wanted for myself, not what I felt socially obligated to do, but what was healthy for my own life. The answer surprised me. I didn't want to shut Sienna out forever. Her letter had been a genuine, excuse-free acknowledgement of what had happened that night. No deflection, no financial requests, just pure accountability. But I also wasn't ready to trust her. 15 years of painful distance doesn't simply vanish because of a single letter, so I wrote back with very strict conditions. Sienna, I have read your letter. I deeply appreciate that you acknowledged what happened that night without making excuses. That took real courage. I am not ready for a full relationship, but I am open to cautious, limited contact under the following conditions. First, there is to be absolutely no contact through mom or dad. I have ended communication with them permanently, and I need that boundary respected completely. Second, there will be no discussions about money, inheritance, or anything related to Uncle Alistair's estate, ever. Third, I reserve the absolute right to end any conversation at any time without explanation. If I go quiet, I need you to respect that space. If these conditions work for you, we can start with a monthly video call, 15 minutes, low pressure. We can talk about our daily lives, keeping things entirely surface level at first. If that goes well, we can gradually build from there. This isn't me saying everything is suddenly forgiven and forgotten. This is me saying I am willing to see if there is something worth building, but it must be entirely on my terms. Let me know if you accept. Her reply came 3 days later. It was just one word: accepted. I scheduled our very first call for the following Saturday, 15 minutes. That was all I could commit to, but it was a start. The first video call with Sienna occurred on a crisp Saturday afternoon in September of 2025, 6 months after the will reading. I sat in my home office with my laptop open, watching the seconds tick down to exactly 2:00 p.m. My heart was beating faster than it had during the entire will reading. This felt far more vulnerable. Confronting Eleanor had been about defending myself against an attack. This was about actively choosing to open a closed door. The call connected and Sienna's face filled the screen. She looked different than she had at Sharp and Associates, less styled, more tired, but also far more real. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi's," I replied. We stared at each other through the screen for a long moment, 15 years of silence compressed into a digital rectangle. "I wasn't entirely sure you'd actually answer," she admitted quietly. "I almost didn't," I said honestly. That broke the tension. Sienna let out a nervous, relieved laugh, and I found myself almost smiling. We kept the conversation light, just as I had requested. We kept it strictly surface level. She told me about her job. She was currently training to become a licensed esthetician, working hard toward her certification. She briefly mentioned her 2 kids, Jaden and Lily, without pressuring me to act as their aunt. I told her about Sterling Crest Holdings, the unpredictable Boston weather, and general, non-personal things. At exactly 14 minutes, I spoke up. "We should wrap up, Sienna." "Paige, wait," her voice stopped me before I could click end. Thank you for giving me a chance. I know you didn't have to." "This is step 1, I said quietly. "We'll see where it goes." "Step 1 is far more than I ever expected," she replied. We scheduled another call for the following month. After she hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, processing the emotions. I didn't know if Sienna and I would ever have a deep, traditional sisterly relationship. Perhaps we would stay in this tentative, careful space forever. But for the first time in my life, I was the one deciding what happened next. That sense of personal agency was worth far more than any inheritance. March 14, 2026. 1 year exactly since the will reading that changed everything. I stood outside a modest brick commercial building in Boston's historic North End, the very first property Uncle Alistair had purchased back in 1987, when he was just a 34-year-old with a dream and barely enough savings for a down payment. The building had been beautifully renovated over the winter, new energy-efficient windows, an updated HVAC system, and fresh, clean landscaping. But today, I was here for a very specific addition. A custom bronze plaque had been mounted right beside the main brick entrance. The Alistair R. Sterling Building, in memory of a man who chose love over blood, 1953-2025. I gently touched the raised metal letters of his name, feeling the cold bronze under my fingertips. In the year since the will reading, Sterling Crest holdings had grown by 12%, bringing our total portfolio value to $26.5 million. Our occupancy rates remained steady above 95%. We had successfully expanded into 2 new properties and upgraded 3 existing ones. More importantly, the Paige Sterling Robotics Scholarship had officially awarded its very first academic grants. 5 incredible young students from difficult family backgrounds had received full funding to attend elite summer programs in engineering and mathematics. Dr. Mercer at the Boston Pediatric Trust had personally helped me select the recipients. Sienna and I still talk once a month. Our conversations have gotten slightly easier over time. We have graduated from 15 minutes to 25. I've seen digital photos of her children, and she has seen pictures of my home. We aren't sisters in any traditional, effortless sense, but we are building something real. Eleanor and Gideon have completely stopped trying to contact me. I don't know what their daily lives look like now, and I have found that I don't need to know. Nadia walked up beside me on the sidewalk, looking up at the plaque. "Are you doing okay, Paige?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm peaceful," I said with a smile. "That's even better than happy." Uncle Alistair had taught me that family is a choice, and I had finally learned to choose myself. The sky over Boston was clear for the first time in weeks. I could see all the way across the harbor to the ocean. If I look at my own journey through a psychological lens, there is a profound concept known as conditional self-worth, the deep, damaging belief that you are only valuable if certain people approve of you. I spent the first 13 years of my life entirely trapped in that belief. My mother's cold indifference felt like absolute proof that I was inherently unworthy of love. But what actually saved my life wasn't Uncle Alistair's estate or his business. It was his completely unconditional acceptance. He saw me exactly for who I was, not who I was supposed to be. Here is what I want you to take away from my story. You do not need anyone else's permission to know your own worth, and you have every single right to set firm, unwavering boundaries, even with family, even with parents, even with your own blood. Forgiveness is a quiet gift you give to yourself. Reconciliation is an active choice you make for your own life. Those are 2 entirely different things, and no one else gets to decide which one you choose to offer. Your story is entirely yours to write. Thank you so much for staying with me through this entire journey. If it resonated with your own life, if you've ever had to find your own worth after someone tried to take it away, please know that you are not alone. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, please subscribe to Their Secret Stories and hit the notification bell. Until next time, take care of yourself.